Welcome to the Numerical Tarot, a new tarot paradigm, an alternative to tradition, an axial system of archetypal crystallography, a transculturally anthropomorphized, life-biased binary influence calculator, a wisdom system and archetype enhancer with harmony of interpretation throughout. The content of all the videos in this series are excerpts, edits and brief summaries from the eBooks All Things Are Numbers and All Things Are Patterns, links below. For a more complete explanation of each idea, additional reading might be helpful. Hopefully the basic ideas come across enough to pique your interest in trying this alternative approach to tarot. I've had an interest in art since childhood. Unfortunately, I've never gotten any good at it. That's my fault. Like my teachers feared, I didn't apply myself enough. But that has not stopped me from drawing the few tarot decks that I've drawn over the years. There is a vision there that has taken many iterations over many years to perfect. Over those many years, my amazingly talented mother would sometimes help out with the drawing of figures, which was a particular weak point in my skills and a particularly strong point among her skills. Even in the later years of her life, I managed to cajole her into helping me one last time. So she drew the figures for the Numerical Tarot. I drew out sketches of what I wanted, poses, costumes, props, etc., and she interpreted those drawings into something better. And to make things easier on her, I took her multiple attempts, she was a perfectionist, and combined them to make the final images. I'm sure she would have wanted to redraw them many more times, but I didn't want to overtax her generosity. That's also why I did not attempt to have her draw all the other cards of the deck. And, to not overtax myself, I drew those as very simple figures, which turned out to be something I now like, because of how it delineates the majors from the minors. Having the figures of the minors be more simple makes them like pawns on a chessboard, with the important pieces being the more elaborately detailed majors. This kind of intent, being in this instance a happy accident, is important to a full and complete appreciation of this deck design. With that in mind, this video will proceed to point out other not so obvious, and some plainly obvious hallmarks of this deck design. I am old now, so I may not live long enough to ever see anyone draw a so-called clone deck using my system and drawing from my existing images. I hope that, like the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, maybe 100 years from now, someone will stumble upon my decks, or books or videos and see something interesting, and draw a clone deck that looks a lot better than anything I've been capable of producing thus far. In the meantime, there is a newly discovered source that might help me in realizing this dream, without the help of another human. In our amazing digital age, advancements in artificial intelligence have produced programs that can draw images from craftily written prompts. The results are often unpredictable, based on the intelligence of the crafted sentence, but still amazing. Sometimes the computer takes things too literally. Sometimes it draws what you asked for, but mixes it with other things in ways that look like a horrible Star Trek transporter accident. It often has problems with faces when they are small in the image. Same with fingers on hands. But, if one gives a very well-crafted prompt, with proper sentence structure and plenty of detail, stunning results are often possible. With this in mind, I requested access to what is supposed to be one of the best of these image creation programs, DALL-E 2. I am currently practicing hard at writing prompts that actually get me what I want, but it is not easy. I have completely given up on trying to get an image where the character is full frame and complete, and with the same pose and props as my Numerical Tarot majors. So, I am settling for images that fit the description and intent of the character in whatever position the program decides to deliver. Each time I ask for an image, I get 4 variations, which is nice. And if I run the exact same prompt again, I would get 4 more completely different images. Amazing! So, even though I am still a novice at this, I have decided to do this video, where I both explain design hallmarks, and show some of my first attempts at creating usable art for another deck. When I first started attempting the creation of images, I chose to ask for realistic oil paintings. After doing a few that came out halfway decent, I got the idea to do the entire majors. Even though I was not completely thrilled with the output I was getting by asking for oil paintings, I had already done a bunch, so I decided to finish that way, even though, at times, what I got back did not always match the oil painting look of the other images. That's what one is up against when using one of these programs, fighting against the randomness of its interpretations. I may not be able to generate images that are good enough to actually use in a new deck, but they can be used to further suggest to anyone thinking of drawing a clone what each icon is about, by providing multiple variations on a theme for each icon. I actually have a document available where I did massive image searches for images that could be used that way. But without copyright permission, I can't publish that document in a video like this. But I can publish the images I get from DALL-E too. So let's get into it. This video will only cover the major icons of the numerical deck. Let's look at them all together, as the 2 rows of 9 that they represent. With that in mind, if you have not followed through all the videos previous to this one, I might mention things and ideas from those videos that might cause confusion. I can only hope that such confusion will encourage you to go back and acquaint yourself with all that background knowledge. Here are the major icons. There are several ideas that run through each row. Some of these ideas came across better in decks previous to this one, like my isomorphic deck and seasonal deck. One of those ideas is to have a day and night cycle, in conjunction with the more obvious positive versus negative and life versus death cycles. In the numerical deck, that idea is somewhat lost, but there is at least a rising sun at the beginning, with the genie, with that same sun being up in the sky at the end, with the god. And, with a moon rising at the beginning of the negative row, with the jinx, and setting in the sky at the end, with the ghoul. Even if the progression of light to dark does not progress incrementally through the cards like a spectrum. It might be cooler if they did. Oh, and, by the way, before we go any further, let's look at the names given to each icon. They were not chosen in any haphazard way. Which brings up another point to cover first. One thing you will notice throughout this video about hallmarks of design is my appreciation of alliteration. This comes in the usual phonetic way, as well as the visual repetition of shapes between cards that are meant to relate to each other in some way. So as we look at the names for each major icon, we not only see a series of alliterations, but we see them spaced out across the deck in a sensible way that helps us remember the alternating nature of the number line. I don't know if there is a word for visual alliteration, but there is a lot of it in this deck. Everywhere, usually between cards that are the opposite to each other, in this completely binary deck design. Thus we have a genie and jinx, a beauty and beast, a wizard and witch, a saint and sadist, and a god and ghoul. And while we are looking at names, let's make note of another unique feature of the numerical tarot: balance between male and female figures. Take a look at a deck like the Rider-Waite-Smith, and count the male versus female figures, either in the majors only, or the whole deck. It will not be balanced. In this deck, there is balance, both in the majors as well as the whole deck. In addition to having a positive versus negative cycle and a life and death cycle and a day and night cycle, previous decks had a more obvious progression up from lowlands to mountaintop through the positive majors, and across the negative row a series of inverts, shown as lakes or canyons. All that is left of this idea is in the 2 5s, where we see a pointy mountain behind the wizard, illustrating the 5 as a watershed type of midpoint. And then a canyon behind the negative 5 witch. Well, there is also a small mountain peak in the distance behind the god at the end, and a small mountain in the distance behind the genie at the beginning. When we get to the minors, we will see a mountain behind the 7 of diamonds, and someone reaching a mountaintop at the 9. And speaking of the life versus death cycle, definitely something many tarot enthusiasts don't like about my decks. Tarot card readers like to fill their clients with hope and reassurance, so a deck that depicts a very definite life and death cycle becomes undesirable. Most likely the main reason I will die without ever seeing anyone draw a clone of this deck. Because it just won't sell to these type of people. But, given that my main purpose for creating such a deck is not to give people hope and reassurance, but to create a system that covers as full and complete a spectrum of life and death, illustrating a life and death cycle becomes imperative. I think the last thing to observe about the 2 rows together is the poses given to each icon, and how they relate to each other through this idea of visual alliteration. The poses were at least partially determined by the shape of the 4 conic sections. Weird, I know. Long story. Don't ask. But if you look, the 1s and 9s are kind of hyperbolic, especially when illustrated with 2 cones, as is often the case. So they face out to the ends, more or less, with arms and legs extended to resemble the curved shape of a hyperbola. The 2s and 8s are then similar, but facing inward with arms and legs extended, more or less, to resemble a parabola. The 3s and 7s are then meant to face forward, more or less. That doesn't really make them resemble the sides of an ellipse, but close enough. The 4s and 6s again face inward to each other, on either side of the midpoint. Again, not creating a perfect circle, but at least creating the idea that they belong together as a set, same as the others. With the 4s and 6s, this idea of them being a set that encircles the wizard and witch is also shown in their pose, by each one having a raised leg resting on a prop. In the positive 4 and 6, they both have a foot on a square or cube. In the negative 4 and 6, they both have a foot on circle or cylinder. When we look at the wizard and witch at position 5, we see that they too have a square or cube and circle or cylinder in the form of an alchemistic furnace and cauldron. Their alchemistic nature is appropriately at the midpoint where sides mix together in them. When the wizard mixes, he produces an angel, who appears to us in the very next card. Likewise, when the witch mixes, she produces a demon, who appears to us in the very next card. This helps to convey the idea of an arrow of time that moves us through each row. Let's look for some other positive to negative visual alliterations. The genie gives the spark of life, with a fetus in a bubble in his outstretched hand. The jinx promotes the idea of bad fate by sticking pins in a voodoo doll in his outstretched hand. The muse points us down a straight path that leads to an open pergola. The haunt blocks us from a winding path that ends at a closed gate. The beauty is surrounded by tropical plants as she raises an arm to smell a flower. The beast is surrounded by thorns as he raises his arm to tear away his clothes as he turns into a werewolf. The hero is holding tools of construction with bricks and hammer, and surrounded by a protective brick wall. The villain is holding tools of destruction with a torch and club, and surrounded by destructive flames. The hero has mountains behind. The villain has an erupting volcano behind. The angel holds a baby up overhead to enjoy its beauty. The devil holds a baby over a pit of fire. A field of corn means wealth. The flames of hell means poverty. Ideas illustrated in more detail in the minors. The saint is a Krishna-like figure with a flute in his mouth. The sadist is a dominatrix-like figure with a whip in her mouth. Behind the saint is a hill with a house. Behind the sadist is the lightning-struck tower from traditional tarot, with crosses of crucifixion out front. The lumina is sprinkling fairy dust down to a Vivian. The wraith is squeezing the last drops of life out of the star from the star card of traditional tarot, with the last drops of water leaving the jug held by the naked woman. Next to the god is a Jacob's ladder or stairway to heaven for those receiving eternal life. Next to the ghoul is a beam of light from the moon, beckoning us into the great maw of death, just like the road in a traditional tarot deck. The god has a pile of books to read about that knowledge. The ghoul has a pile of skulls not reading. What else can we find? Well, each card has a small inset that features a hand. Those hands are the hands of the benefactor or victim of each card. In this deck, the major icons are considered influencers, or gods if you prefer. And the simply drawn figures in the minors are considered the influenced, or mortals if preferred. And while they are more elaborately illustrated in the minors, a small reference to a mortal is included in each major card. The magic of the genie makes us a genius. The inspiration of the muse makes us a visionary with telescope. The beauty of the beauty makes us want to be an artist with paintbrush. The courage of the hero makes us want to be a valiant helping with construction. The wizard produces a medium. The prosperity of the angel makes us royal with a diamond ring. The spiritual nature of the saint makes us virtuous. The excitement of the lumina makes us a Vivian with cup overflowing. The godlike influence of the universe makes us a sage reaching ever higher. The randomness of the jinx makes us look like an idiot with boogers on our finger. The obfuscation of the haunt makes us a lost waif with spider webs on our hands. The beast makes us talentless oafs scratching pathetic scrawls on a wall. The villain makes us a victim reaching for a branch that fails us. The witch produces a misfit. The devil makes us an unwanted reject with severed hand. The sadist makes us a crucified sinner. The wraith makes us sickling one step from death, pouring out our last drop of life. The ghoul makes us a corpse desperately reaching out of our grave. But wait, there's more. There are also some illustrative insets with each major icon that are also a bit visually alliterative. The genie shows a point of light. The jinx shows a point of dark. The muse shows a bee making a beeline. The haunt shows a fly caught in a web, not making a beeline. The beauty shows a nice neat looking leaf from a plant. The beast shows a rough looking leaf from a weed. The hero shows a chain with strong links. The villain shows a chain with a weak link. The wizard shows a bird in the hand. The witch shows a bird biting the hand that feeds it. The angel shows a bundle of sticks bound together. The devil shows sticks not bound together. The saint shows a bird of paradise plant. The sadist shows a Venus flytrap. The lumina shows a dragonfly. The wraith shows a cobra. Okay, that one doesn't match up very well. When you draw your own deck, you can fix that. The god shows a pot of gold. The ghoul shows a pot of ashes. Let's move on to what is in each card, and also show some of those DALL-E 2 images. Along the way, you might notice things in each image that are the same as what you see in popular decks of today, like the Rider-Waite-Smith. In those cases, they are meant to convey the same ideas, helping to show places where my deck actually agrees with tradition. In the sky of the genie is a swift, because his thinking is swift. The fetus represents beginning. I had a hard time getting DALL-E 2 to put a fetus in the bubble, so I did it myself. Otherwise, not bad. In the distance of the muse are several creatures flying and swimming, conveying direct motion and motivation. As you may have noticed, from the previously shown rejects, I had an impossible time getting DALL-E 2 to put a lyre in her arms, like it is in my drawing. The beauty is surrounded by tropical beauty. If you decide to draw a deck, you can add much more tropical stuff than I did here. I like all these variations, but some of them don't look like the other royal paintings as requested from DALL-E 2. The brick wall in the hero is to protect, like the wall of mountains are a natural wall. He also has a crown to make him kingly, and a knife to make him a warrior. He stands on the cornerstone of his next building. This was another one that was not easy to get DALL-E 2 to make. A majestic winged creature flies through the skies of the wizard. The cards that extend to either side of the wizard are his wings, or his antlers, from the elk in the distance. He reads from a book of laws, another object with wings and a spine. It rains on one side of the mountain and not the other. The angel grows corn. We already covered that one. And she has a treasure chest full of riches. I asked for wings to be on the woman, as the angel, but they kept appearing on the baby instead. And being raised overhead was hard to get too. The saint has a chariot, just like the chariot card in traditional decks, so that he can ascend to heaven just like Elijah. He is surrounded by red roses. Krishna is a good choice, but I decided to also look for other saints and shamans. The Lumina has floating fish that are turning into birds flying away. Also, kites flying in the air. Floating is an important concept for this card. In her ballet shoes, she floats along like any good dancer. Unfortunately, DALL-E 2 likes to crop off heads. The god has books and a stairway to heaven that we have already covered. He has a Saturnian planet on his staff, so that he is not completely Zeus-like. Zeus has an eagle on his staff. I thought a pyramid might be cool too. The Jinx has a jumble of tarot cards flying through the air randomly. What is your fate? I asked DALL-E 2 for striped legs or pants and a black shirt. Sometimes, it likes to do the exact opposite of what you ask for. The haunt has poisonous spiders that will paralyze you. She covers her face with a fan so you can't see her. I could not get DALL-E 2 to make the web into a cape that looks anything like the one I drew. Otherwise, not bad. Behind the beast is a pig, hanging upside down, just like the Hanged Man card of traditional tarot, being drawn and quartered, just like people hanging upside down were sometimes executed. I had to import a sample to get DALL-E 2 to draw a werewolf or wolfman. The villain stands on a burning stump, with an erupting volcano behind. All that is left from her destruction. This one was difficult to get right too. I only managed to get both torch and club into two of them. The witch has a black cat. And a pentagram and candles for a ritual curse. A witch behind a cauldron was easy enough. Getting the demon to be there with her was not as easy, but looks good in the close-ups. The devil is surrounded by diseased rats. He stands on a pit of fire. He scribbles a 666 into the head of a baby. DALL-E 2 censures some pictures if too graphic, so I asked for a devil holding a bag overhead. The sadist has a stump of her own where she beheads people. She is covered in blood. Here too, DALL-E 2 might have rejected by prompt if it had been too violent. But this is the card of violence, so I did what I could. The wraith has poisonous snakes all around her. There is an ibis in a tree, copied directly from the Rider-Waite-Smith star card. Ibis-headed Thoth counts the dead or dying. This is the card of someone sick and probably dying. The ghoul has bats flying around, creating chaos in the dark. He also has a grave waiting for you. It took several tries to get this one right too. That's it for the major icons of the numerical tarot. After I get better at writing prompts for these AI art programs, I might make another card-by-card video with new art samples made with a different style. Still not sure if I'll be able to get usable art from these sources, good enough to make a whole other deck, so my request for collaboration with anyone wanting to draw a complete deck still stands. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Links to ebooks, decks and merchandise below. Buy a deck.